bra cups are assembled, let's start putting together the body of the Monet. Now, even though the Monet is not a classic corset, there is a technique in classic corsetry that I think is very helpful, not in the sewing and making it easier, but just to prevent mistakes. And that is, in classic corsetry, you assemble your fronts, which is usually your center front piece and your side piece, then your middles, which is usually like the side front, the side back, the middle back, and then the back. The reason for this is that usually a corset has a busk in the front and it has the grommets in the back. But what it helps you do is that when you insert that busk or put on those grommets, if you had to sew the rest of the corset with that in it, it gets very cumbersome underneath the machine. So doing them individually, the fronts, the middles, the backs, and then bringing them all together at the end just prevents things from like getting flip-flopped or also like hardware getting in the way of sewing, especially when we add that waist tab on the middle section of the Merry Widow. So I have gone ahead, really simple step, I don't need to show a video of it, of assembling the fronts. Center front to side front, I did a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back to the beginning end. I did not even press it with an iron because once we sew on those boning channels and do the edge stitch, that will kind of do the same thing as an iron as far as pressing it. And then I went ahead and I did the middles as well. Now for the middles, I demonstrated adding the boning channels, which is the next step. Key thing about adding the boning channels is that, and it's basically just underwire channeling, same thing that you use in bra making, is that each seam gets 3 rows of stitches. And I've done each step, so step 1, step 2, and then this is step 3, to demonstrate that. The first step through seam allowances only. The second step through all layers. Keep that in mind when we're doing it. So with the middle, and you're gonna do this operation to all the middle pieces and then to the center front, the seam that connects the center front panel to the side panel. It's a lot of stitching. This is very much a Netflix and chill step. You don't have to do anything to the back because that's just a single piece. So for the first step is that you are going to lay your underwire channeling over that seam allowance. The channeling is going to be right next to that seam line. It shouldn't be over it, it should be right next. And then your first row of stitches that is through the seam allowances only, it's not through the whole fabric, it's just through the seam allowances, should be right next to that edge. So you have your seam line, then you have the edge of your channeling, and then your stitching sits right inside that channeling. Then you are going to flip your channeling. Everything is facing, all the seam allowances are facing towards the back, and then you're gonna do a edge stitch. And if you see, I didn't press this either because once you edge stitch it, it really helps for it to lie flat as if you pressed it. Also, when I'm doing this edge stitch, I like to increase my stitch length to about 3.5. I was always taught that any sort of top stitching should be, the stitch length should be increased. So I do that one edge stitch. Super important that you get really close to that edge because we're gonna sew another row of top stitching. And if those 2 rows of top stitching are too close together, you won't be able to insert your boning. Now, I get this question a lot, is that why don't you just sew this and the top stitch, or why don't you just sew step 1 and the seam in one operation? I feel like you have a better and cleaner turn back when you do 2. Just my personal preference. Then you've done step 1, you've done step 2. The third step is to sew super close on the other side. So at the end of this operation, there will be a stitch on one side of the channeling and then also on the other side of the channeling. So you're gonna have 2 rows of top stitching. middles are assembled with the boning channel. Don't flip out if you see this here and you're like, well, I didn't do that. That is what we're doing in this step. But I wanted to show you the after of the last step, which is the boning channels. So as you can see, there are 2 rows of stitches visible on the exterior. And then on the interior, there is 1 row of stitching on one side of the channeling and 1 row of stitching on the other side of the channeling. We can put this away for right now. For this step, we are adding the waist tab. And first of all, this waist tab is completely optional. It's decorative. It can add a little bit of waist reduction depending on the type of elastic that you're using, as well as if you added any more curvature into your pattern. So if you don't like this look, if you want to wear it as a foundation, you don't want this showing, you want a really nice seamless look to your Merry Widow, you can completely eliminate this step and just move on. But the first step is that I place one of these strips of elastic right at the waist tab. And then in the instructions, it says to place like a 1/2 inch above or 1/2 inch below. But that spacing above and below, totally up to you. If you want to do something a little bit wider, I think I have about like 3/4 of an inch between them to give like more spacing in between the elastics, you can. For the top and bottom ones, I also sewed them at an angle since I did increase the distance between all 3 of them. Once you have these, I just basted them into place. I just sewed a straight stitch to just put them into place before I attach it to the fronts. Then you're gonna take your closure, which we had these made just for the Merry Widow. And you can place this, even though the instructions say to place it in the middle, you can place it forwards or backwards, whatever you want. That's the lovely thing about Me Made. So you're just going to feed these through and fold them back and then sew a straight stitch to secure them. I have the elastics pinned in place to the closure. You will stitch this back and forth. Another trick is that you can just sew 1 row of stitching all the way down, 1 row of stitching all the way back, and then clip in between. Since that second stitch all the way, and you stitch all the way forwards, all the way backwards, that second stitch backwards counts as your back stitch. So it'll hold those stitches in place. For the other side of the closure, I actually stitched 2 of these elastics together so that it would fit really nice and snug into the slider as well as the closure. I fed one end through the center bar and down again and stitched really close to that closure. This is the same operation as a bra strap. So if you are familiar with bra making, this is exactly the same with bra strap. Then I'm going to feed this through that closure and up and over that center bar again. And this is the same as the first step. So if you're wondering like, wait, how do I do that up and over the center bar? This is how you do it. Now I made mine way too short for the example, but you want to make yours a little bit longer so that it will reach all the way to the side. At the end of this video, here is where you should be. The fronts together, the middles together, the waist tab attached if you are adding the waist tab, and then attaching the middles to the front and adding all the boning channels to all of these seams. One thing that I added to mine that is not in the instructions, but I did want to mention, is that I added a strip of channeling right, again, I'm not flicking you off. I added a strip of channeling right in the center. I find that sometimes I have a hard time with the frame tacking. So if I add a strip of channeling right in the center and I add boning there, it just helps the frame to lay flat against my chest wall. Completely optional, totally up to you, but I wanted to throw it out there as an option.